It is much better to act and repent than not to act and regret. Niccolò Machiavelli, the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, once whispered a truth that would echo through millennia: the only constant in life is change. As lightning split the night sky above his home in Ephesus, he watched how the ensuing chaos of thunder and rain brought life to parched earth. Was it possible, he wondered, that disorder, not order, was the universe's true creative force? This paradox haunts us still. Might our desperate pursuit of stability be precisely what holds us back from our greatest potential? In the dim light of a Tokyo subway car, Kenji Sato gripped the handrail as the train lurched forward. A systems engineer with 20 years at the same corporation, he had built his life around predictability. Same route to work, same lunch, same reports filed in the same folders. His colleagues admired his efficiency, yet as the train rattled through the underground darkness, Kenji felt something he couldn't name, a hollowness echoing beneath his carefully structured existence. The order he had cultivated had become a cage of his own making. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation, Thoreau had written, a sentiment that would have resonated with millions like Kenji. We craft illusions of permanence, stable jobs, 5-year plans, retirement accounts, constructing fortresses against uncertainty. Yet what if these very fortresses are preventing us from experiencing the fullness of human existence? What if chaos, rather than being our enemy, contains seeds of power we've been taught to fear? The ancient Chinese understood this duality in their concept of yin and yang, order and chaos forever intertwined, neither complete without the other. The Tao Te Ching suggests that true wisdom lies not in imposing rigid structure, but in flowing with change. Nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water, yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it. Western philosophy eventually caught up to this insight through Nietzsche, who proclaimed that one must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. Our modern laboratories have begun confirming what these philosophers intuited. In the 1970s, Belgian chemist Ilya Prigogine won the Nobel Prize for demonstrating how dissipative structures, systems far from equilibrium, can spontaneously generate new forms of order from chaos. His work revealed that when energy flows through a system push it away from stability, remarkable new patterns and structures can emerge. This principle, now known as self-organization, explains how everything from weather systems, to economies, to biological cells can create complexity without an external designer. Dr. Catherine Hales, a researcher at Stanford University's Complex Systems Laboratory, explained it to me this way: when a system becomes too rigid, too perfectly ordered, it loses its ability to adapt, it becomes brittle. But introduce enough instability, the right kind of chaos, and the system can reorganize at a higher level of functioning. She gestured to a screen displaying a simulation of neural networks reorganizing after disruption. We see this in the brain after injury, in ecosystems after fire, in economies after disruption. The chaos creates space for innovation. Indeed, neuroscience has revealed that our brains operate at what scientists call the edge of chaos, a sweet spot between rigid order and complete randomness. Too much order in neural activity is associated with epileptic seizures, too much randomness with certain forms of dementia. But at this critical boundary between chaos and order, the brain achieves its remarkable computational power. Studies of creativity consistently show that breakthrough ideas emerge when conventional patterns of thought are disrupted, forcing new neural pathways to form. Consider the evidence from organizational psychology. Companies that maintain rigid hierarchies and processes consistently underperform more adaptive competitors in changing markets. A 2019 McKinsey study found that the most innovative firms deliberately introduce elements of controlled chaos, rotating leadership roles, encouraging internal competition between ideas, and creating spaces for unstructured exploration. Google's famous 20% time policy, which allows engineers to spend 1/5 of their work hours on projects of their choosing, has produced some of its most successful products, including Gmail and Google Maps. Even on a personal level, the evidence for chaos' creative power accumulates. Psychologist James Kaufman's research on post-traumatic growth documents how people who weather major life disruptions often emerge with greater resilience, deeper relationships, and more authentic values than those whose lives proceed smoothly. It's not that suffering is good, Kaufman clarifies, but rather that instability forces adaptation and can catalyze growth that wouldn't otherwise occur. But here lies the challenge that makes us retreat to the comfort of order. Chaos is uncomfortable, unpredictable, sometimes painful. Our evolutionary programming pushes us toward the known, the stable, the controlled. Our educational systems reward conformity over creativity. Our workplaces incentivize predictable mediocrity over risky brilliance. And perhaps most powerfully, our anxiety, that deep primal fear of the unknown, drives us to impose order wherever we can. Yet what if this discomfort is precisely the point? What if the electricity of anxiety that accompanies uncertainty is not a warning, but energy, the very voltage needed to power transformation? This brings us to the central question: if chaos contains such generative power, how might we harness it without being destroyed by it? How do we dance with disorder rather than either surrendering to or attempting to eliminate it? The answer may lie in the concept of anti-fragility, developed by risk analyst Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Unlike fragile systems that break under stress, or merely robust systems that withstand it, anti-fragile systems actually improve and strengthen when exposed to volatility, randomness, and disorder. The human immune system is anti-fragile, exposure to germs strengthens it. Muscles are anti-fragile, they grow when damaged during exercise. Might we cultivate anti-fragility in our lives, our institutions, our societies? Historical examples suggest this is possible. Renaissance Florence flourished during political turmoil that would have paralyzed a more rigid society. Silicon Valley emerged as a global innovation hub, precisely because its culture embraced failure and disruption. The Japanese aesthetic concept of wabi-sabi finds beauty in imperfection and transience rather than denying them. But transforming our relationship with chaos requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands practical strategies for everyday life. Here are approaches pioneered by those who have learned to draw power from instability. First, consider the practice of deliberate disruption. Artists have long understood that creativity requires breaking patterns. Painter Brian Eno developed oblique strategies, a deck of cards with instructions like honor thy error as a hidden intention, or work at a different speed. When stuck, he would draw a card and follow its chaos-inducing directive. Similarly, writers like Hemingway would sometimes begin work at different times, or write standing up to disrupt habitual thinking. In business, companies like Pixar institutionalize constructive conflict. Their brain trust meetings deliberately challenge creators' assumptions in service of better storytelling. As founder Ed Catmull explains, early on all our movies suck. It's through the process of disrupting what we think we know that they become great. Second, we might practice what Zen Buddhists call beginner's mind. This mental stance approaches each situation as if encountering it for the first time, setting aside expertise that can calcify into rigid thinking. As researcher Alison Gopnik has demonstrated, children learn faster than adults, partly because their minds remain open to possibilities adults have learned to filter out. Cultivating this openness, this willingness to not know, creates space for insights that certainty blocks. Third, we can develop greater tolerance for ambiguity. Psychologist Els Frankel Brunswick identified ambiguity tolerance as a key trait of creative and psychologically healthy individuals. Those with high tolerance can hold contradictory ideas without rushing to resolve them, allowing deeper patterns to emerge. This capacity can be strengthened through practices from dialectical thinking to meditation to exposure to diverse perspectives. Fourth, we might reimagine failure, not as something to avoid, but as information to incorporate. Edison's thousands of unsuccessful attempts to create a working light bulb weren't failures in his mind, but discoveries of ways that won't work. Each eliminated possibility brought him closer to success. Similarly, the scientific method itself harnesses chaos by generating hypotheses and then attempting to disprove them, a process that appears inefficient but has proven unmatched at building reliable knowledge. Finally, we can cultivate improvisational skill, the ability to work with whatever emerges. Jazz musicians don't fight unexpected notes, but incorporate them into new melodies. Emergency room doctors don't follow rigid protocols, but adapt to each unique crisis. This capacity to respond creatively to the unplanned may be our most valuable resource in an increasingly unpredictable world. But what of stability? Does embracing chaos mean abandoning all structure, all planning, all order? Quite the opposite. The paradox runs deeper. To harness chaos, we need certain stable elements. Jazz improvisation works because it builds on thoroughly mastered scales and chord progressions. Scientific discovery happens within methodological frameworks. Even nature's most chaotic systems contain underlying patterns. The key insight is that productive chaos exists not in opposition to all order, but rather in dynamic tension with it. The goal is not the elimination of structure, but rather structures that can flex, adapt, and evolve. Structures that work with, rather than against, the fundamental unpredictability of existence. Consider the practice of scenario planning, pioneered by Royal Dutch Shell in the 1970s. Rather than attempting to predict a single future, the company develops multiple possible scenarios and prepares for them all. This approach acknowledges uncertainty while creating frameworks to respond to it. When the 1973 oil crisis hit, Shell was the only major energy company prepared, transforming potential chaos into strategic advantage. Or consider how certain rituals, in religion, creative practice, or daily life, provide containers that make space for transformation. The controlled chaos of carnival traditions worldwide creates temporary suspension of normal rules within clear boundaries of time and place. The Japanese tea ceremony imposes exquisite order precisely to create psychological space for presence and insight. Meditation retreats remove everyday distractions, not to eliminate mental activity, but to allow deeper patterns of thought to emerge. This dance between chaos and order appears at every scale of existence. Ecosystems thrive through a balance of disruption and stability. Forest fires clear undergrowth and release nutrients, creating space for new growth. Economies innovate through what economist Joseph Schumpeter called creative destruction, as new technologies and business models displace older forms. Even our bodies maintain homeostasis, not through rigid control, but through countless feedback loops, responding to constant change. Yet our institutions, educational systems, corporations, governments, often remain stubbornly committed to controlling, rather than harnessing chaos. Schools standardize learning, despite evidence that discovery requires exploration. Companies demand quarterly predictability, despite research showing innovation requires experimentation. Governments attempt to legislate certainty in a world of accelerating change. This institutional resistance reflects something deeper: our collective anxiety about uncertainty. We've built civilizations on the promise of controlling nature, predicting outcomes, eliminating risk. We measure progress by how thoroughly we've subdued chaos. Yet, as complexity theorist Stuart Kauffman observes, we live in a world of overwhelming, non-algorithmic, unprecedented complexity. Our very science has led us beyond the dream of prediction and control. The COVID-19 pandemic offered a global lesson in this reality. Those who approached it seeking perfect control, through either denial or draconian measures, largely failed. More successful responses came from systems that quickly adapted, incorporating new information and adjusting strategies as the situation evolved. Countries like Taiwan and New Zealand demonstrated how preparedness combined with flexibility outperformed rigid planning. At the individual level, those who maintained connection and meaning while adapting to changing circumstances generally fared better psychologically than those who either denied reality or became paralyzed by it. Perhaps our task is not to eliminate chaos, but to develop what ecologists call resilience, the capacity of a system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while maintaining essential function. Resilient systems have redundancy, diversity, modularity, and feedback mechanisms. They expect disruption and design for recovery, rather than perfect prevention. This shift from controlling chaos to dancing with it requires more than practical strategies. It demands a fundamental reorientation of values. When we prize stability above all, we optimize for preservation of what exists. When we recognize the generative power of chaos, we optimize for adaptation, creativity, and growth. Japanese pottery tradition offers a powerful metaphor for this reorientation through the art of kintsugi. When a valuable ceramic piece breaks, Rather than discarding it or hiding the damage, practitioners repair it with gold lacquer, highlighting rather than concealing the fractures. The resulting piece, with its veins of gold tracing lines of former breakage, becomes more valuable and unique than the original untouched vessel. This practice embodies a profound philosophy. Damage and repair are part of an object's history, not something to erase. Might we approach the inevitable fractures in our lives, relationships ending, careers changing, beliefs challenged, as opportunities for kintsugi, not minimizing the pain of disruption, but recognizing how our responses to chaos can create something more beautiful and resilient than what existed before. The environmentalist Joanna Macy suggests a similar perspective in what she calls the Great Turning, viewing the profound disruptions of our time not simply as collapse, but as opportunity for transformation. The most remarkable feature of this historical moment is not that we are on the way to destroying our world, she writes. It is that we are beginning to wake up, as from a millennia-long sleep, to a whole new relationship to our world, to ourselves, and to each other. This awakening doesn't deny the real dangers of certain kinds of chaos, climate instability, political violence, technological disruption, without ethical guidance. Rather, it suggests that our response to these challenges requires precisely the creativity, adaptability, and capacity for emergence that come from embracing rather than suppressing the chaotic elements of existence. The writer Rebecca Solnit, in her study of communities after disasters, discovered something surprising. Amid the undeniable suffering, people often experienced unexpected joy, purpose, and connection. The possibility of paradise hovers on the cusp of coming into being, she observed, so much so that it takes powerful forces to keep such a paradise at bay. In the suspension of normal order, people discovered capacities for cooperation, generosity, and meaning-making that stable times had hidden. This paradox, that our fullest humanity sometimes emerges precisely when ordered systems break down, offers a profound challenge to how we've organized our world. What if our institutions were designed not to eliminate chaos, but to harness its creative potential? What if our personal lives were structured not around avoiding disruption, but around developing the capacity to transform through it? Such questions lead beyond strategies to worldview, to how we understand reality itself. Ancient wisdom traditions from Buddhism to indigenous knowledge systems have long suggested that the universe is not a machine to be controlled, but a living process to be engaged with. Modern complexity science, with its emphasis on emergence and self-organization, has begun to catch up to this intuition. If the fundamental nature of reality is not fixed but flowing, then our task is not to impose rigid order, but to participate skillfully in ever-evolving patterns. This participation requires what philosopher Bayo Akamoloff calls post-activism, not rushing to fix but slowing down to notice the deeper patterns beneath apparent chaos. It requires what ecologist David Abram terms becoming animal, reconnecting with our body's innate wisdom for navigating uncertainty. It requires what futurist James Cassio describes as long now thinking, considering consequences beyond immediate outcomes to how systems evolve over time. As day broke over the Tokyo skyline, Kenji Sato stood at the window of his apartment, watching the city awaken. Yesterday, his company had announced restructuring, his department would be eliminated, his carefully constructed routine disrupted. Initial panic had given way to a strange sense of possibility. For the first time in decades, he didn't know what would happen next. He thought of his grandfather, who had survived the chaos of war and rebuilding, who had told him stories of how communities had formed amid destruction, how innovation had emerged from necessity. In the broken places, his grandfather had said, new growth finds room to emerge. Kenji felt something unfamiliar, not the comfort of certainty, but the aliveness of potential. He had spent his life avoiding precisely this feeling. Now it coursed through him like electricity, uncomfortable, yet energizing. Whatever came next would not be what he had planned, and therein lay possibilities he could not yet imagine. The power of chaos is not that it destroys order, but that it creates space for new orders to emerge, in ecosystems, in societies, in individual lives. The instability we fear may contain exactly the creative force needed for our next evolution, not chaotic destruction for its own sake,
but the dance between disruption and emergence that has driven adaptation since life began. Our challenge is not to eliminate chaos, an impossible task, but to develop the inner stability that allows us to move with it creatively, to build systems flexible enough to incorporate disruption, to cultivate communities resilient enough to transform through change, to become, ourselves, like those jazz musicians, who don't just survive unexpected notes but transform them into new melodies. In the ancient Chinese book of divination, the I Ching, the hexagram for chaos is also the hexagram for opportunity. The same symbol represents both crisis and potential. The wisdom lies not in choosing between order and chaos, but in recognizing their inseparability and in developing the capacity to work with both. As we face accelerating change on every front, technological, ecological, social, this capacity becomes not just desirable, but essential. Those who cling rigidly to existing patterns will experience change as threat. Those who can dance with disruption may discover unprecedented possibilities for creativity, connection, and meaning. The forest does not fight the wildfire, but incorporates it into cycles of renewal. The river does not resist the boulder, but shapes itself around it, creating new patterns of flow. The jazz ensemble doesn't deny the unexpected note, but builds new harmonies that include it. What might become possible if we approached the inevitable disruptions of our lives not as failures of control, but as invitations to evolution? What might we create together if we understood that power exists not just in maintaining order, but in harnessing the generative force of chaos? As Heraclitus watched the lightning illuminate the night sky over ancient Greece, he recognized a truth we still struggle to embrace: we never step into the same river twice. Change is not what happens to the permanent, change is what is permanent. And in that recognition lies not just acceptance, but possibility, the possibility that within the chaos we fear may lie exactly the creativity we need. The path forward requires not better methods of prediction and control, but greater capacity for presence and adaptation. Not rigid boundaries against disorder, but permeable membranes that can incorporate disruption into new forms of order. Not fear of uncertainty, but curiosity about what might emerge from it. In the end, the power in chaos is not that it destroys what exists, but that it creates space for what might yet be. The seed requires the breaking of its shell. The butterfly requires the dissolution of the caterpillar. Perhaps our next evolution, as individuals, as societies, as a species, requires not just the preservation of existing order, but the courage to dance with the creative chaos from which all new forms emerge. As morning light filled his apartment, Kenji felt this courage stirring within him, not the absence of fear, but something deeper moving beneath it. Whatever came next would not be what he had planned, and that he was beginning to understand might be precisely the point.